Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Q&As, and in keeping with the tradition I've started recently, I'm just going to voice these over some of the previous week's training footage. In fact, I've got so much of it from this last week that it shouldn't be a problem at all rotating new stuff in. So let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, first question. Hi Jason, love your videos. I've been benching for 2 years now and have recently stopped due to shoulder pain. I'm curious if the bar path is diagonal. After reading stronglifts, I learned it is. My question is, can I stick to overhead and incline dumbbell bench press? No plans on powerlifting. Thanks, brah. Alright, I'll be the first person to tell you you do not need the bench press. The bench press is always going to be an optional exercise. It's never a requirement if you're not going to compete using the bench press or be tested on the bench press for something you compete in. It isn't a required lift. If you just don't want to do it, you know what? Don't do it. You don't have to do it. You could certainly build size and strength and everything else using incline presses, overhead presses, all of that. Not a problem. However, you do need to keep in mind it is a valuable tool that I wouldn't necessarily just discard. In fact, I go so far as to say that we all need to learn to do all of the basic exercises pain-free to some extent. Because if there's a problem with your biomechanics or leverages or whatever you have going on with your technique, something going on with you, the way you're training, to where you have maybe muscles that are too tight somewhere or something else, or you have a weak link somewhere that you can't do all of the basic exercises with a moderate weight pain-free. And I don't care what those exercises are, a dip, a bench press, a front squat, a back squat, a deadlift. It doesn't matter what it is. You need to be at least able to do them proficiently without injury if you want well-balanced strength. So my concern is not so much that you want to quit the bench press, because that's fine. The bench press is optional. My concern is that you're taking a basic exercise that you should be able to perform without pain, and it's causing pain. It's time for you to step back and assess what's going on with your bench press. What's causing this? What are you doing wrong with your technique or with your muscle balance that's causing this? Because it could be an issue of maybe just really strong front delts, weak rear delts. It could be an issue of your bar path. It could be an issue of lack of flexibility in your chest. There could be a lot of things going on. They could be everything from muscle balance to flexibility to the way you're performing the exercise. But I would suggest that you at least go back and work on the exercise a little bit until you can do it pain-free, just for the sake of being fully functional. I think that's important for general fitness. We all need to be able to perform all of the basic exercises, all the basic movement patterns pain-free. And if we can't do that, that's something that each of us need to address individually. But is it necessary for you to perform the lift and use it to reach your goal since you're not going to compete with it? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. All right, next question. Hi, Jason. We know professional boxers use PEDs. However, when they come in disgustingly shredded, Errol Spence, Kel Brook, etc., how come they perform so well? We know the shredded bodybuilders can't perform for a dime on show day. How come fighters can? Thank you. Keep up the good work and forget about the haters and trash talkers. All right, brother, good question, and thank you for the props there. A couple of reasons going on. Number one, because bodybuilders use usually unusual methods that inhibit performance to get leaner. Meaning, how many bodybuilders you see out there who just use straight cardio and conditioning work while eating more calories than the average person would ever consider to get leaner. A lot of athletes are lean purely due to the fact that they have such an enormous energy turnover and they have such enormous nutrient partitioning benefits due to the fact that they probably eat large amounts of calories, large amounts of carbs, burn a lot of fat, but don't necessarily eat as much fat as they burn. And that's kind of the point I always make when it comes to nutrient partitioning. For most people, calories in, calories out is going to be king. And it still matters to athletes. It's just that they do get nutrient partitioning advantages when you become a very, very, very conditioned athlete who eats large amounts of calories. There can definitely be a case to where body fat loss isn't always going to be proportional to deficit, to caloric deficit. It's interesting recomposition effects that can happen with athletes who do very, very large volumes of work. And we need to keep in mind the average person who trains an hour a day isn't going to see this to the same extent. But when you have seriously conditioned athletes, that's often the case. So they're not using caloric restriction to necessarily get leaner. and a lot of them aren't dehydrating themselves, and they haven't gone through a phase of cutting down. It's usually the bodybuilders are so depleted because they've spent a long period of time trimming down, whereas these boxers are maintaining peak condition year round. And when you're in peak condition year round, of course your performance is going to be good. And they can perform because they eat enough to perform. They don't necessarily need the reserves in their body, whereas in bodybuilders have usually subjected themselves to dramatic water cuts, extended fat loss phases, large amounts of different drugs that impact this. There's a lot of factors going on that makes them so much weaker. And I think what you're going to find is that some of these athletes might not actually be as lean as these bodybuilders are. You might think they are, but what you might have is an actual athlete who might be 8% body fat, 9% body fat, and they look shredded when they're up and moving and sweating and pumped and everything. And they look leaner than that, but they really are something like 9% body fat, but you're comparing them to a bodybuilder who might be 5%. And there's a big difference between the two. So there's a lot going on. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I recently injured my shoulder doing the bench press, and my question is, can I build my chest with only dips and some incline chest machines? Thank you so much. Great job on that cut. All right, thank you, brother. And yeah, I'm happy with the cut so far. It's coming along great. It's right on track. I'm happy with it so far, and I'm going to continue doing it. To your question, it kind of comes back to this other question. Can you do so? Sure. But it's also important for you to diagnose and figure out why you've injured your shoulder. All right, you need to figure out why you injured your shoulder, because the bench press, when performed correctly, done correctly, programmed correctly, shouldn't injure you. It shouldn't injure you at all. So something is going on that you need to address, because the problem is that if it's a muscle imbalance or it's your technique and certain things on the bench, certain injuries that people get on the bench press are due to a technique that they may carry over to their other forms of chest presses. And you might not realize that at first, but down the line you might realize that the same bad habits that hurt you on the bench press will eventually hurt you even on a machine, on a dip, everything else. So you really need to find out specifically and diagnose your problem, and watch some of my bench press videos and other stuff and figure out what caused you to get hurt, so that you don't hurt yourself again on these other exercises. Because that's the problem with shoulder injuries, is that once you have a shoulder injury, it becomes very, very easy to re-injure that same injury over and over and over. And that's the last thing any of us want to have happen. All right, next question. All right, and this guy had two questions, and I chose his second question for the one I wanted to answer, and he wrote, the other question is about your cut. Would you do the liss after the gym workout normally with no problem, or is it obligatory to have a couple hours rest and a carb up? Heard you say the cross-training effect is only a concern when in a massing phase, but cutting is a different story. As far as that goes, man, I usually eat something. That's usually what I do. If I'm going to do a lot of cardio after I train, and I do, because a lot of my filming days, particularly if I deadlift, I don't want to do cardio and then go in and deadlift. I just prefer not to do that. It affects my performance. So yeah, I'm coming in the gym fresh on those days if I film deadlifting, and I do all 3 hours of my cardio later in the day afterwards. Me personally, yeah, I need to carb up between. I might do a lot of fasted cardio on days where I'm not doing that, but if I'm going to deadlift, yes, I want carbs in me afterwards. Do I necessarily take several hours? No. I sometimes will come in and do my cardio as soon as an hour after deadlifting or any of the heavy lower body lifts. But I do have carbs between. I have food in between. And that's one of the most important things there, is that you need to replenish glycogen between training sessions. You absolutely need to, particularly just for recovery and everything else, and stimulating some growth. It's less important when you're cutting than it is when you're bulking, but it still matters. It's just not as important. So no, I don't jump straight into doing an hour of cardio without eating food in between the two. And I wouldn't recommend that anyone else do that, even for fat loss purposes. There's a certain threshold to where you really don't want to do that, even if getting up and doing fasted cardio might be okay. The main thing is again, recovering to some extent from your training session. All right, next question. Hi, another question. I'm a middle-aged newbie. I followed your guidance on the bench press, but find I am unable to ground my heels in the set position. I presume because of lack of flexibility when scapulas retracted, back arched, etc. Do you think this form might lead to problems when I increase the weight down the road? Any suggestions to mitigate? All right, brother. Yeah, your flexibility could be an issue. You can work on that. You know, you can work on your lower back flexibility. There are things you can do to stretch on the bench. Even put a foam roller on the bench and then roll your lower back over it. And I don't mean use it as a roller because you don't want to roll directly on the spine, but use it to create an arch and to hold a little bit of a stretch. Just be gradual with it. You could start with something smaller than a foam roller. Make sure your hips are mobile. Work on, again, third world squats, things like that. Make sure you've got mobility in your hips and everything. And the other thing you can do, not everyone can really dig in as deep due to that mobility on their heels. Some people need to be on the balls of their feet. Some people need to be on their heels. I can do it either way, but I prefer the balls of my feet. You could try getting up on the balls of your feet with your heels several inches off the ground and try digging in that way and see if that works for you and you can get tighter and get everything set into position. But definitely work on your mobility and flexibility first, and then try different variations of foot positions. Because again, the heels flat and the feet flat and the heels dug in or grounded is one form, but going up on the balls of your feet is another form, and they're both tried and true. So if the one of them is really causing you issues, you don't have to be dogmatic about that unless you're going to compete in something that requires you to do it that way, like you're going to go compete in the IPF or something. So otherwise, be willing to try different foot positions and work on your mobility. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.